Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my co-host is Janet Coursey. Our guest for today's show is Vicki-Ann Bush, and the topic of the show is Who Doesn't Want to Write a Book? But before we get to our show, my panel and I would like to read a few fun quips and quotes, and Vicki-Ann, I'm going to let you start.
At heart, self-publishing is kind of like a bake sale. The end product does not need to resemble the one that comes from a commercial bakery, but it must taste good. No one wants the lumpy, underbaked oatmeal cookies with spinach and alfalfa-flavored chips. That comes to us from D.C. Williams.
I almost feel like I've heard that before.
I think I've tasted that chip.
All right. I went to a bookstore and asked the saleswoman, "Where's the self-help section?" She said if she told me, it would defeat the purpose. And that was George Carlin.
I could see him saying it.
All right. Jen?
As a kid, one day in class, I was daydreaming and not paying attention to the lesson. My teacher looked at me and said, "Name 2 pronouns." I looked around to see who she was talking about and said, "Who? Me?" Anonymous.
All right. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with my guest, Vicki-Ann Bush, and my co-host is Janet Coursey, and we're talking about who doesn't want to write a book. And we're going to start off with Vicki's going to tell us a little bit about herself and what she's written.
Well, like you said, I'm Vicki-Ann Bush.
Sorry.
I'm originally from New York. I come here by way of California.
Okay.
I started writing when I was very young, about 13, in a school contest. We had to write the book, construct the book, and it hooked me.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's kind of neat.
Great
Yeah,
idea.
it was fun. And I kept writing for many years, and I just kept it for myself. And then in 2007, my adult daughters pushed me into submitting, and I got my first publisher in 2008. I actually started off in children's books, and I did that for a while, and then on the suggestion of my then publisher, tried YA, young adult, and that was my niche. I love writing young adult fiction. I write primarily paranormal. I have a little sci-fi, but primarily paranormal.
Mm-hmm. Now, when your first thing that you wrote when you were 13, what genre was that?
Joe Brady, Master Detective.
Oh, wow.
Sounds great.
Murder mystery.
Well, that's kind of neat. And I also know a little bit about Room 629.
629.
Yeah, 629. And that one is from a vacation you took, a local vacation.
It is.
And you got the idea from sitting in a restaurant?
I got the idea after going to a concert and drinking a little too much wine. And next morning, sitting in the cafe, waiting for breakfast, and not feeling up to par.
Now, this is science fiction, I want you to understand.
Yeah. So it was my perception. Perception of what was happening in the restaurant, and then it started from there, and then it was the what if. What if these aren't
So
really...
instead of the room swirling, you were imagining all these characters walking through the door.
Exactly.
Wow, that's kind of neat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a great idea.
Yeah. Because it's science fiction, and I know it's about, you think that there's these aliens that are there in the town, this little town outside Las Vegas.
Primm, Nevada.
Yeah, wow. That's kind
Well, you know, we were talking in a show previous about standing in line at the grocery store and what's the different people's stories. You could do the same thing with that.
Yeah?
At a grocery store.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
That's where it could lead you.
It's funny where we get our ideas.
It is amazing, yeah. And you know, we're picking up from a show that we did a few weeks ago with Vicki-Ann. And on that show, we were basically talking about self-publishing industry and how it's changed so much. So I'm going to read a few things, kind of repeat myself a little bit on this because these statistics are amazing.
Yeah.
I get this from worldmetersinfo.com. And if you go to worldmetersinfo.com, you will see a live feed. That's okay, we do it all the time. You'll see a live feed where it actually shows how many books are being sold. As you're watching, it will change on the screen. And when I tuned in before the show, we had the new books published this year at the start of the show, 2,242,818, which equates to over 7,000 books per day worldwide that are sold.
Mind-blowing.
Wow.
You know, when I started this show in it was 2012, I think at that time the average self-published book was 300 a day, 300 new authors a day. So to imagine that we went from that short time, because that's really not that long ago,
Yeah.
to 7,000 per day is amazing.
Extraordinary.
I'm telling you.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, book publishing is a $130 billion a year business. And when it comes to ebooks, Amazon averages 1,064,000 paid downloads per day.
Oh my gosh.
Per day. And 448,000 of those are self-published. So that tells you the swing in the self-publishing industry and how well it's doing.
Yeah.
Right.
That means that there's only 244,000 that are from the top 5 traditional publishers. And then you have another 204,000 that are from the small to medium-sided publishers. Ebook standings from February 2014 to January 2016. The indie published books were up 16%. The 5 big publishers were down 11%. And the small to medium-sized publishers were down 2%. Amazon published ebooks that are up about 5%. So they're always constantly increasing, which says a lot about the market and where it's going.
Right.
4 out of 10 books are best-selling books by self-published authors, and these are ebooks. 10 out of 20 are best-selling, and 56 out of 100 are from self-published authors. Best-selling. 20 out of 100 selling ebooks were indie titles priced between $2.99 and $5.99. We also talked about it on the show you were on earlier.
Yeah. I
Right.
think people just see 99 cents and then the red flag, they automatically think it's not going to be good. And that's not, that's not the case, but most of the time. But
And that's interesting how that changed, because we used to talk about how you wanted to price your book lower so that people would want to go in and buy it.
Right.
And that you
More
were actually
exposure.
beating. Yeah.
Right.
And I think because of what you just said, people started getting those books and thinking these aren't that good, so I'm going to go for the ones that probably has a lot to do with it. And then a lot of people would go in for free books for promotional purposes.
right.
And I'm still uncertain on how to handle that now. Like, a lot of authors will go in and they'll say, for the first 50 people who go in to look, they can get a book for free. But now, is that a good idea? I mean, I don't know.
You know what? We still do that. Like with my publisher, we'll, discuss doing a free day. Excuse me. And I notice that when I do that, I generate sales later.
Oh, you do?
I
Really?
do. So, but I don't do it for very long. I'll do it for a day.
Okay.
So we'll pick a book like, say, Room 629.
Okay.
And we'll do that free for a day. Well, I did it free for a day, and then for like 2-3 days after, I had consistent sales because people missed the free day, but then it's not that expensive. It's $3.99.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
went ahead and got it anyway.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So there's another way to look at it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's going to work like that every time,
Yeah.
but,
Okay.
there are times that it does.
Yeah, and
Wow.
we also had talked about beta readers, and we had talked about how, so when it comes, so that's kind of doing the same thing, isn't it? If you're giving the book away for free with Kindle, do they come back and write reviews for you or anything?
Sometimes.
They do?
Sometimes. But you know what? Even the ones that are buying it don't always write reviews. It's really hard to get reviews, and it's really hard to ask for them because you don't want to, you don't want to sound like you're bullying anyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of difficult. It's a very delicate
Yeah.
subject.
Yeah. But I do know that also that when it comes to reviews is one of the ways Amazon will rank you,
It is.
and help promote you. It depends on, I think you have to have
50.
50, and then they'll start promoting your book.
Yep. And like I said, I try, but you don't always get them to do it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to skip to the discussion, the panel discussion, and one of the things I'm going to start off with, I'm going to let Jan actually start off with this.
Okay. 81% of Americans want to write a book. And we discussed this a little earlier, too. We're betting it's more than that. Writer Joseph Epstein shared this nugget at the beginning of the new millennium. And we can bet that number still holds pretty close to true. You've got a book in you. Now it's time to just bring it out.
Well, and that's true. I think most people do want to write a book. And even if they don't want to write it, they want to find a ghostwriter to help get it out there, their story out there, even if they can't write it. But there is a huge difference, though, between wanting to write a book and having the ability to write a book.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And there's a couple things we need to talk about here. Because, one, education doesn't make the difference. What makes the difference is the tools that you use to get the book out there and who you go to help you get that book out there.
Correct.
In fact, sometimes in education can be a hindrance because you're trying to be too correct
Yes.
Right, so it doesn't flow.
Right. It doesn't
Yeah.
flow. It doesn't have that voice that it needs
Right.
to carry it. So, and I actually have a friend who I, in the past, when I first time I ever said I was going to write a book, this person said, "You don't have an education. The educational background you have doesn't support what you
Doesn't
want to
support
do.
what
You're
you
not
wanna
a,
do,
you don't
yeah.
have a journalistic background. English was not my best subject,
Yeah.
and I have some college, but I didn't get a degree. So they said, you really don't have what it takes to go out there and publish or write a book.
Right.
At the same time, this person had 2 masters and a PhD and was not creative at all.
Right.
So had the ability to write and put it in proper syntax, but didn't have the ability to create.
Well, there's a difference. And
There is a
one is
difference.
talent.
Yes.
No, I don't mean that in a
Yeah, I
you know, it's like if someone handed me a guitar,
Uh-huh.
okay? I can sit there and practice on that guitar day in and day out, and I know for sure I don't have the talent because my father tried teaching me
Okay. All right.
both guitar and piano. I have an ear for music,
Mhm.
but I don't have the talent when it comes to the coordination of the brain to the hand. Okay.
Oh.
So I think it's the same thing with writing. I think that you can know the mechanics of it.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily mean you have the talent for it.
Yeah. If
That's
you don't,
a very good way of putting
yeah.
it, actually.
No matter how mechanical you are, if you don't have the heart and soul
Right.
and the want,
Right.
it won't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we were talking that at book signings, so many people come up to us that
Yeah.
got a book and said, I've had this idea for a book, and everybody wants to be a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jan and I were saying, I mean, when
Yeah.
you do that, I mean, at least what, 1 out of 4 we
At
said?
least. Yeah.
1 out of 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it'll be also to, they'll say like, I have a story to tell, my life story, and it goes back to ghostwriting. Do you want to write that for me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
But in the person you were on the show with when you were on a few weeks ago, actually said she was inspired to start writing because of Jan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
Jan wrote
Yeah,
her first
she
book and
did.
shared it with her, and Jan said, "Well, you should write your books," because she tells stories. She used to tell stories to her children when they were growing up,
Yeah.
and they were stories she made up. So basically, all she did, she already had the creative mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Very
so it's
imaginative.
just a matter of taking that and putting it in writing.
Right.
Yeah.
When I took some classes on writing stories years ago, when I first started, one of the things that they taught me was, well, this lady, actually, there was one lady who was there who gave a conference, and she's a best-selling author. And she wrote the book Sudi, and she wrote the book Alice. And the thing is that she said that she wrote her book in longhand in a spiral notebook, and you could barely read it. And she thought she had a great story. Of course, we all do. But she
Right.
wasn't sure, so she passed it along to someone else to read, and couldn't read it. They couldn't understand it. So she finally had this friend who's also a best-selling author, and she gave it to her to read, and she was busy doing something, so she asked her husband to read it.
Yeah.
Her husband's laying in bed trying to read it while she's working on something else, and he's like, "I can't read this crap." So he pushed it aside, and she thought, "Well, I'm going to try." So she sat there and read these notes, because that's really what they were.
Right.
And she starts reading it, and she realizes if you get through the syntax and you get through the grammatical errors and the punctuation, there's a real story there.
Yeah.
And it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then she put it in some format in the word processor, and sent it to someone she knew in New York. Needless to say, both books became bestsellers, and both were made into Lifetime movies.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible?
So
It's amazing.
yeah. So it's not so much the educational background. If you
Right.
have it in you, there's ways to get it done out there.
Yes.
You can hire an editor, find someone to help ghostwrite it, like you said, with the first book, How I Got This Show, that's what happened.
Yeah.
This woman came to me. She had these notebooks full of the story that she wanted to tell. I basically took it, put it in a format for her, and next thing you know, it's a book.
Yep.
Oh, I remember you telling me about that. Yeah.
She was the very first guest on this show.
Yeah.
And it came from, and that's how the show came about. An executive from the radio station at that time that I was on, came to the event, heard us talking about it, and said, "Would you like to talk about this on the air?"
Oh.
So
Yeah.
Aspects of Writing was born out of something just like this.
Right.
So, we never should think about, can I do it? If you want to do it, at least try and just do it.
That's what I always tell them.
Yeah.
I go, sit down and start.
Yeah.
But I don't know where to begin. Just sit down.
Yeah. Write
Start.
that first sentence.
Yeah.
I would also suggest writers groups.
Yeah.
Even if you don't join one, just go and spend one evening with them.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of authors who actively participate in writers groups.
Yes.
I'm kind of one of those who's a bit of a loner. I kind of do better on my own. But I have gone and listened and and then absorbed.
Right.
But then I take it with me and I do it on my own.
And that's kind of a controversial thing as well, because a lot of people say, well, you need to be a good reader in order to be a good writer. And the thing I have about that is sometimes people say, well, if you're going to write science fiction, you should be reading science fiction novels. Then there's the other side of the coin where someone will say, if you're writing science fiction, you shouldn't read science fiction. And the reason is that you don't want to emulate someone else. You don't want someone to come and say, oh, that's just like so-and-so writes.
Right.
Right.
Like Vicki-Ann Bush.
Right.
You don't,
Right.
You want to have your own voice. You don't
Right.
want someone else's.
Right.
So, I don't know.
I don't read, like if I'm writing paranormal, my favorite author is Kuntz.
Okay.
When I'm writing paranormal, I don't read Kuntz.
Okay.
If I'm writing the sci-fi, another one I like is Robin Cook. Now his is very medical, that. But if I'm writing anything like Room 629, because of that kind of feeling to it,
right.
I wouldn't read one of those books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's something to keep in mind too. I never think about maybe it's because we have it when we look at things we have inside, but I never think about what someone else has written or the way they write. But I guess we do it automatically anyway.
I was going to say, I think it's subconscious.
Yeah, subconscious.
If you're reading a book and then you next day you go to sit down and write your own book, okay? What you read before is back there.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you're going to bring it forth without even realizing you're bringing it forth.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is too, I was writing a short story that I actually submitted a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And right when I was writing it, a good friend of mine asked me to read hers. And I didn't even realize that on like the very last bit of the short story, I picked up a couple of her words. And when I went back and did like my first edit, I went,
yeah,
I don't normally use those words. What the heck?
Yeah.
So I went ahead and changed it for me. But it was funny. I did it without even knowing I was doing it.
So the basic thing is we want to stay original.
Yes.
Right.
As
But
much as we can.
Yeah, because
as much as we can.
so much has been written. It's hard
Right.
to be completely original.
It is hard. You know what? I think it's impossible, really.
Yeah.
But we try to stay as much of ourselves as we can.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the next thing is self-published books account for 31% of all ebooks in the Kindle store, and that was in 2014. And we already read the statistics. That's even increased since then. Yeah. So a lot of times, some people, we've had a few authors who go straight to ebooks.
Yes.
And they don't do a printed version. But my take on that is why? Because nowadays you can put you can put the ebook version out there, and you can still do the format and set it up as a printed format as well. Because some people still like to have a book in their hand.
Yes.
Right.
And you might be missing out on a sale if it doesn't cost you anything extra to put it in, that format.
I think that the reason, and I'm just guessing with self-published, is that it's going to cost them more because they have to order them.
No, but you don't, though. If you go through CreateSpace or Smashwords or any of these companies where you can do a book.
No, I mean it costs them because they have to order them, because then they're going to have to take them.
Right.
They're
You
taking
mean-
them to venues.
Right.
And
The
if
reader.
they're taking them right. No, if you're an author, okay, and you're just solely going online, then you're not doing anything else really out of that realm. But if you have a print book, more than likely you want to get it out there to other venues that you're going to go to do signings. So,
Right, but I'm saying even if you don't do signings, because we had an author who never had done a signing till he'd been on our show.
Right.
Even if you don't do signings, let's say you have family and friends, you may have to do signings for them. You don't have to do any signings. But if they wanted a printed version, they just go online and order it.
Right. No, I was just thinking of why, as a self-published author, that might be something that is a negative if you're thinking of a bigger picture.
Yeah, I'm thinking that if you're going to put it out there anyway, you might as well put it up for.
Oh, I agree
for
with
print
you.
format.
I agree
You
with
have nothing to lose and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
to gain.
No,
Yeah.
I totally
So,
agree with
yeah.
you. I'm just thinking what they, I'm trying to think
Yeah.
of what they would be thinking.
And that's probably what they're thinking, which is answering exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is because they're thinking, well, that's a lot more. I'll have to pay for the book, but you really don't.
Right.
Because if you order it directly from Amazon, it's printed and shipped from them.
Right.
You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, but then when you're paying for that book, but then you're selling it, so then you're making a profit. So really, it's not costing you. Do you understand?
You're actually making money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're actually
so that's
making
why
money.
I want to get that mindset in people. Like don't be afraid to go ahead and
Right.
put it in that format.
Right.
If it's a matter of maybe I don't know how to create that format. Really, you probably have done that already before
Yeah.
you put it into an ebook format because you
Right.
had
Yeah.
to have it at a certain point.
You had to have the
make it
manuscript
right.
in order to do it.
Yeah. So to me, I think it would behoove you to go ahead and do it. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Exactly. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
See, we turned her around.
Oh no, I was agreeing with you all along.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get in their heads and see what they were thinking.
Okay. Jen, you want to take the next one?
Okay. 40% of all ebook revenue is going to indie authors, even though their books only account for 31% of the landscape. Indies are raking in more money, which means that their sale figures are higher than many of their traditional counterparts. That's really interesting.
Well, and we even read that that's even more now.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was 2014.
Yeah.
So in 3 years, this is like switched really. There's more actually going into the independent authors than in the traditional published authors when it comes to. Now, that's collectively. You got to understand that when you're with your traditional publisher, you don't have as many authors that are being published through that traditional publisher on average as independent publishers.
Right.
So, if you have, like you were talking about, Coons or
King.
Grisham or someone like that, they're out there selling 2,000 and 3,000 at a sitting.
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
No.
We want to do that, but
No.
we're not doing that. At least not yet. Anyway,
Yeah.
indie books represent 25% of the books on Amazon's bestsellers, which we also went over that. We talked about the bestsellers and how now as many as 56 out of 100 are independent authors that they publish themselves.
Yeah.
Jan, let you take number 5.
Okay. Smut isn't keeping the indie boat afloat. Only a small portion of self-pubbed book sales are the erotica titles. Only 1.2%, in fact.
And that's
And
about
we're-
the same.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's interesting because I would think that there's so much new stuff coming out. And that's only because our friend Gregory Compass has introduced me to other genres that I'm even reading some of this stuff now.
Well, but his isn't really smut.
No, but I'm venturing out from him as well.
Well, yeah, you mean as far as the average reader, that's what we
Right.
were talking about is
Yeah.
that, she was talking about how sometimes we get into this thing where we think we have to read a book like Grisham or Coons or King,
Yeah.
and that's what we're used to reading. But because we've had people on the show, she'll take their books and she'll start reading them sometimes, like she did with Gregory Compass, and found out she really liked the book.
Oh, yes.
Totally different genre, but loved the book.
Yeah. It's
And then-
something I would never have read on my own if he hadn't been a guest on our show. And he was a very interesting gentleman, so I wanted to read. I just fell in love with it.
I think I'm fortunate too to be exposed to that because when we do signings together, a lot of times the authors will exchange books.
Yes.
And I have read books that are out of my normal read of
Right.
genre and that I have absolutely loved.
Yeah.
And normally would never have picked up to look at.
Right. Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm gonna switch. We're gonna go to number 7. We're gonna skip 6.
Okay.
Well, we talked about 6. 6 is actually where we talked about the book selling
Price
for
point.
$2.99 to $3.99, right? So you want to read number 7, Jen?
Okay. Think you can only release short and novellas on ebook? Think again. The best-selling books in the ebooks are usually over 100,000 words. Maybe because they're easier to hold now that they're in digital format. And we talked about that a long time ago, too, about 80,000 words was tops.
Well, but here's the thing too that's different. One, it is true you don't have as thick a book to have to carry around.
Right.
But the real reason why most self-published books are between 70 to 80,000 words is page count.
Yeah.
Because as a self-published author, you have to be aware of how much it's going to cost to produce that book in order to make a profit.
Yeah.
And if you have a 100,000 word book and you're adding 20,000 more words to that, you're adding quite a few pages to that book.
Right.
Right.
So that means now the cost factor goes up, which means you have to charge more for the book. And if you're charging more than $15.95, $16.95 for a self-published book in a store, it's hard to sell them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, you can't hardly get the stores to carry them if they're beyond
Right.
that price point.
I've actually seen signings where a couple of people have had books that they'd had to up the price and they were self-published and up to like $21.99. It doesn't go over very well.
No.
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 I mean, you may sell them at an event. You may sell 6, 7, maybe. But the thing is that if you wanna have an audience out there of several thousand, and you want to keep selling, you're going to have to make it just like a book from a traditional publisher, which we talked
That's right.
about before.
Right.
You know, you have to make it just like a traditional publisher. That's the reason for the 100,000 words. But if it's in digital format,
Right.
and you're just out there, so that might be one reason to just sell in ebook format
Right.
because it doesn't behoove you to go out there and spend the money
Yes.
to do, or have someone spend the money to buy a 100,000 word count.
Right.
All right. If you write nonfiction, you can ask for a higher price. Your buyers aren't as price sensitive as fiction buyers. That's kind of an interesting thing, and I wonder if that's shifting a little bit. But I do know that probably people. I know I'm mostly interested in true stories, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can be fiction because they have what's called historical fiction.
Yeah.
So even if it's just a take on something, well, S.H. Montgomery, hers is basically historical fiction. She has Al Capone in the book, but it's a fictional story.
Right.
So, you know, that's the way I go. But I don't know that that's necessarily true today. I think almost anything. Well, actually, I think I did read later on. We're going to get to it to where that has changed to almost anything selling now. Science fiction, young adult fiction. You know, the market isn't where it was just 2 or 3 years ago, because these statistics are, by the way, from 2014.
Right.
So in 3 years, think about how much this industry has changed.
Yeah.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in it since 2008, and it's changed a lot.
Well, even the programs on the that you can get for the internet or just buy to write books and to make book covers.
Right.
And to,
Oh my gosh,
know.
it's amazing.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
And we have a statistic here, Jan. I don't need you to read it because we already said like 752,000
Right.
books are published per year now.
Yeah.
The paperback, and then it says it's a good time to be a woman. Indie bestsellers is twice as likely to be written by a woman than traditionally published bestsellers, 67% versus 39%. Why do you think that trend is?
Women are more passionate.
Well, probably when it comes to writing romance. But I notice more and more women are writing in different genres as well. Like you're writing science fiction. I mean, in the past, I've never thought about a woman writing a science fiction book. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
You know, not one comes to mind.
Yeah. I know
So,
what you mean.
yeah. So I think maybe it's because women are branching out now and saying, just like we had talked about earlier, you don't have to pigeonhole yourself to writing in one genre. Well, you know.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with a sign of, just how everything is, what's going on right now in, just in the world, in our world. Like you say, women are trying different things, doing different things where you wouldn't expect to see them. You're seeing them, the things that they normally wouldn't do, they're doing. And I think that might have an allure,
Yes.
because it's kind of like, oh, new mystery. What is this?
Yeah.
Like you say, me doing sci-fi. You wouldn't normally see women doing sci-fi, right?
All right.
So it's like, okay, let me see.
Well, Sidney Sheldon used to use an anonymous when he, or what do you call it?
A pen name.
A pen name when he would write women's stories.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
he did romance.
Yes.
A lot of authors have done that. And then I'm trying to think. My mind's going blank. But Harry Potter,
Oh, J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling's.
Yeah.
J.K. because she didn't want people to know whether it was a man or a woman.
Right.
So I think and probably she's helped the industry a lot if you think about it. Just her success alone has changed the way we think about
Yes.
who pens a book,
Right.
whether
Yes.
it be a man or a woman.
Right. You know, it's funny because we got into a topic one day over that. One of the authors had written a book that was out of the norm with my publisher, you know, our group, and was thinking about doing a pen name. And their advice was, that's fine as long as you don't plan on doing appearances, because you don't have a book that has just, you know, that kind of following yet.
Yeah.
And if you're going to go someplace and you use, let's just say you're writing a female type audience and you're a male, but you're writing under a woman's name, they're going to expect to see that woman author.
Right.
And here you have this guy show up, or vice versa.
Yeah.
You know? So I guess they were just kind of going over the pros and cons.
Isn't there actually a movie where somebody wrote a book and somebody else pretended to be them?
That's
Oh,
it
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
familiar.
yeah.
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 I mean, I actually thought about it very briefly when I wrote. I have my one of my latest ones, which I haven't sent in yet, but it's very different. It's not paranormal. It's very true to life, and it's also just very, very different. And I thought, well, everybody knows me as paranormal sci-fi. Should I, you know? And then I decided, no. You know, they know who I am now. They're starting to know.
Right.
Might as well stick with that.
Yeah.
Well, I have an article here that was written by Andrea Hurst, and she's an agent, and the article is titled "The Reality of Self-Publishing: An Agent's Perspective." So we're going to read a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about it. As a literary agent, I receive hundreds of query letters every month and reject about 99% of them. Many aspiring writers dream of getting a good book published, but for most, it's just a tough road to navigate, and today's economy is making it even harder to get a deal from a traditional publisher. These factors, coupled with the increasingly affordable and accessible choices for self-publishing, are promoting many authors to get the book out there on their own. And she's got a very valid point there.
Yeah.
You know, and you even we've talked about your getting an agent.
Yeah.
You know, it's getting harder and harder to find the agent because what their job has changed so much, you know.
Right.
I remember we talked about this on a show in the past too, is where I've had several agents.
Yeah.
Boy, were they disasters. But one of the mistakes people make, and this probably still goes on, and boy, I can't say this enough. If someone's charging you for them to be your agent, they're not an agent.
No.
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 So if someone says, well, I just need you to cover the cost of shipping and postage. What shipping and postage? We're in the email age.
Right.
Right.
There is no shipping and postage.
Welcome to the internet.
Right.
Yeah. So that is the first thing. Because I'm guaranteeing you can find an agent if you go that route.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not an agent.
No.
Nope.
No.
No.
If someone tells you that they're new in the business and they're seeing what it's like to be an agent, that's probably a red flag as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Afraid so.
You know, and I've been down that road. I've been down both the roads we just mentioned, and both cost me dearly with contracts with studios for a book
Wow.
to be made to a
Yeah.
movie. So this is something I've learned the hard way. You know, you have to have someone, first of all, who knows how to talk to the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and secondly, who knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
And if you have someone who's saying, "Give me $200 and I'll cover my postage," and then find out later on when they happen to, well, how do I remember your name? I have 300 clients. Yeah,
Right.
you might have
Yeah.
got the wrong agent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Indeed, self-publishing can be successful. Several recent bestsellers started out self-published before landing a mainstream deal and hitting it big. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Celestial Prophecy, which I did not realize that, Aragon, and The Shack.
I didn't realize that about the Shack.
You did it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. So see, that's an interesting take on this as well. We know from past shows there have been many successful authors who started off either self-publishing and selling out of the back of the car, or going to the e-books and selling the books as e-books, and then landing, after 3 or 4 years of successful. We always talk about one author in particular. She sells 200,000 copies a month in
Yeah.
e-books, copies. And it took 3 years before a traditional publisher picked her up.
Wow.
And you're wondering why.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, after millions sold, why did it take you that long to pick her
Right.
up? And then you have to wonder about how it's being handled, because I understand since this traditional publisher, she went with a traditional publisher, her success rate isn't there like it was before.
Oh,
which,
really?
no.
Oh, wow.
So I think sometimes you might know your own market better than a publisher does.
Right.
yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right. So
That's a little scary.
it is a scary. And
Yeah.
you know, that's the thing with today. We all think, well, I need a publisher, and I want a publisher, and I'm going to go out there and do my best to try and find one. And I'm just like that too. You know, I think we all have that aspiration of, I'll go ahead and get it out there as a self-published author, and then maybe down the road, you know, I'll sell X amount of books. That'll get someone's attention, and then I can secure a traditional publisher. But the thing about that is if you're already making those kind of sales, why do you need a traditional publisher?
Right.
Well, see, I just went right out and I never self-published.
Right,
I just
right.
went and, you know, typical
Right.
query letters and do that. And that's how I got the publisher, you know. And I've been very lucky with
No,
mine.
but I'm not. Yeah, no. I understand that, Vicki-Ann, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a traditional publisher. I'm just saying that if you've already gone out there as a self-published author
Yeah.
and you're already selling 200,000 copies a month,
Yeah.
why would you really need a traditional publisher? Because think about the following you must have to be selling that kind of books.
I don't think it's need. I still think that there's a certain amount of.
Verification?
Yes, I do. I think it's
Like
a-
I've arrived.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. Yeah, that makes sense now. Okay. All right. When a submission to an agent states that the book was formerly self-published, that can be a red flag. And that's an interesting take. We'll talk about that in a minute. If a book doesn't sell well in the first printing, regardless of who and what house produced it, it's very unlikely that another publisher will pick it up. When agents like me receive queries from a writer with self-published book, we first ask how many copies it has sold and how long it has been in print. We're looking for one set of qualifications: a highly marketable hook and a product that has sold at least 5,000 books, preferably in just a year or less on the market. And that's not asking a lot, to be honest with you, to try and get a traditional publisher. If you sell 5,000 copies, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is.
So even with traditional publishers, you
Yeah.
know,
Right.
I think there's a misnomer about the industry in that every author that's published, even through a publisher, is a bestseller, and that's not true.
No.
And actually, a lot of times, even with a publisher, you're doing a lot of the marketing.
Yes.
And that's what happens. People get lazy. They think, okay, I don't want to do all this work, so I'm just going to go out and find a traditional publisher, and then they'll do everything.
I've heard that many a time.
But it doesn't work that way.
And I think that's what a lot of people who are self-published, when you talk about another reason why would you do that? Because they think it's just going to get handed over and then they don't have to do it anymore. But you do have to do it. You do
Yeah.
have to stay out there.
Right. Remember when we had this one guy on the show, though? It's kind of funny. We all think, too, that when we're a writer, like you've done well to do, you've had like 2 or 3 publishing companies now who've taken your books.
Yeah.
And we had one guy on who was, he wrote this story, and he wanted to sell the screenplay, and then the idea came up, we'll write as a novel and then I'll sell the screenplay. And he thought, well, I'll just go out there and I'll get a random house to take my book, or, you know, and then I'll sell 1 million copies, and then I'll have it, you know, then Sony will want it, and they'll make it a major motion picture. And he told the story, and I won't repeat it too much, but he told the story where the same guy came back to him and said, you know, maybe you should just self-publish, because he wasn't getting anywhere. And he was going, no, I'm going to eventually get this. And then like 3 or 4 times this happened over the years. And finally, after about 4 or 5 years, the guy says, you know, you really should just think about self-publishing.
Right. Which is what he did.
And which is what he did. And the thing is that now he's doing quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very popular.
So sometimes it's, if you
Yeah.
can't get anywhere and get a publisher, sometimes that's the reason we go into self-publishing.
Yes. I agree. I understand.
And there are
that.
some good authors out there who are undiscovered. Like the last guest we had a guest on who talked about a book that he wrote that was about a young boy coming of age and stuff. And his publishers didn't know what to do with the book. Because was it a recipe book? Was it a story about a young boy? So how do we market this? And even though he had sold over 2 million copies of his work in the past, and he'd always been traditionally published, it was frustrating because he couldn't get anyone to take this book and produce it.
Right.
So he self-published the book.
Yeah.
And he's out there marketing it himself now. Right. And I think sometimes we even discussed this on the show you were on before, Vicki, where sometimes traditional publishers get too caught up in what that author's selling now and not giving them the freedom to go out there and be more creative.
Right. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Especially I think if, like we talked about getting an agent, what the agent would expect. And I find though with the middle line publishers that you have, like I said before at the other, on the other show, that you have a little more freedom. I just feel that they'll work with you a little bit more,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. We can have this discussion about self-publishing and traditional publishing, and we have it amongst ourselves as authors too, because we're mixed, even in the town here, doing our thing. And I think it's just what works for you.
Yeah.
And that's what it really boils down to. If you're that kind of person who you need that affirmation, then even if you're doing well as an indie published author, you're going to take it when a publisher wants to sign you. Yeah. But if you're not and you're perfectly comfortable, then you're going to keep going. If you are the type of person that just likes having a publisher because, and this is my case, because I'm a nudnik, and to self-publish, I look at that stuff and I'm like, no, someone else do it for me.
Well, we've had authors who say it's really easy.
Yes.
And for some people, it is really easy.
Right.
But then there's the other side of that, too, to where some people just can't put it together at all. It's like very difficult to figure out. I'm one of those who I didn't find it easy when I started, although I had been publishing since 1995. But I did it the old-fashioned way, where you had to submit your manuscript to be made into plates, and they printed these plates with sheets. So it was a different era. So I've kind of like progressed as I've gone along, which is what I also love about this show, because I get to talk about all this, so I get to keep up with what the latest news is with the industry. But not everyone is afforded that. And for someone who's just starting out, who hasn't published a book before or never gone out there and even promoted a book, it can be quite daunting. I mean, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I get it with those people, and I really do. That's why we do this show. As a matter of fact, we want to lead people through the weeds, so to speak. Try and make it as easy as possible. We try to give them information where they can go, the easiest sites to go to find out where they can publish. And then we also need to make them, we try to create the reality around it. Like, it isn't easy whether you go with a traditional publisher, a mid to small range publisher, or self-publishing. They're all difficult.
Exactly.
It's just about, if you can't get your book out there and you really believe in it, self-publish it.
Right.
Right.
Don't give up on the idea.
Right.
But you better be ready to be a businessman, because now that's what you're going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's so many people that are private people that don't want to be out there talking to people, and their book, no matter how good it is, will never do well, because if they don't get out there and promote it, it's never going to go anywhere.
Right.
So you have to get over that fear. Number one, people love to talk to anybody who says they're an author.
Yeah.
They love you.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't know who you are, but they love you.
Right.
I had to get over that fear in the beginning.
Really?
Yeah, because I was more introverted back then, and it was very difficult for me to talk about my own books. But the more I did signings and the more people came up, because they love to talk to an author.
They do.
The more, the more comfortable you become, and then the easier it gets. And then now, look, you can't shut me up.
I really, I had very mixed signals when I started out, because I did small signings in small stores with my first novel, and then when I came to Las Vegas with it and it got into Barnes & Nobles, we've talked about this, my first signing, I had 77 people show up for a lecture I was doing to sell my books. So I thought that's the way it was always going to be from that point forward.
Yeah.
Because you do think that way.
Yeah.
My second signing, I'm at also a Borders Books, but it was over off of Stephanie before they closed over there.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And I remember I'm sitting there, and I'm at this table setting all the things you're not supposed to do, I was doing, and no one told me not to.
Right.
And I'm sitting at this table. I'm not approaching anybody. I'm thinking they're going to see the copy of the book, and they're just going to come by and
They're
have
just going to
these-
gravitate
Yeah.
right toward you, huh?
Now, granted, there were people walking around through the store, and they were looking at me as I was looking at them. And I'm thinking, I wonder why they don't come over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything to them.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't until some friends showed up in a drove, and they got in line, and then I noticed all the people who had been walking around through the store who wanted to approach me but didn't know how, and I wasn't saying anything to them,
Right.
got in line too.
Yeah.
And that made that second one a success. But I learned a valuable lesson there.
Yeah.
You
Stand
cannot just sit there.
No.
So if you're going to want to write a book, then you're going to have to learn to be a business person. And it doesn't matter whether you're traditionally published or self-published. You're
Right.
still going to have to go out there and do this.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
And you know what? Even the big authors have to do this.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just part of what the whole process.
Well,
Yeah.
when Stephen J. Cannell, I talk about him a lot. I really admired the man. When he did his signing at the store I was at, I remember he even told me I have to do a lecture or something before I do my book, because he's not an Anne Rice, and and he's not Grisham or someone who can get a line that's for 3 or 4 blocks around the store.
Right.
He, even though he had 42 shows on television, he wasn't known as an author, so he didn't have that following. So he still had to do something to entice people to come and see him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to get his autograph.
And who
Yeah.
is this? I'm sorry, I missed.
Stephen J. Cannell.
Oh, okay.
21 Jump
Yes,
Street,
yes,
Hell Street
yes,
Blues.
yes.
Yeah. So, it doesn't even matter who you are. We don't, very few people have that following that the big name authors have.
Right. Right.
Well, look at Don Bonhart.
Yeah.
Don Lewis Bonhart. He's
He was in business
director of
Saved by the
Mork and
Bell,
Mork
Bork
and
and
Mindy. Saved by
Oh,
the
see,
Bell.
I'm not familiar with his name.
Yeah, no one is.
See?
That's the thing.
Right.
But he thought because he had been in Hollywood for 40 years that he goes out there and writes these novels,
Yeah.
which he's a brilliant writer, and he wrote 4 novels. He thought he was going to sell a ton of them.
Yeah.
And nobody.
First time he was on my show, he had sold 7 books.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
But his first book signing at Barnes & Noble, he sold 27.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is he just assumed, and he didn't want to do the book signings. He really thought, well, I've got a name. Why aren't they just buying my book? Nobody
Yeah.
knew who he was.
Right.
In Hollywood, unless you're an actor or a really well-known movie director,
Right.
very few people know who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
We see the credits, but we don't pay attention to those
Exactly.
names.
Right.
Exactly.
So I don't care how successful you were in one industry.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a name that's a household name, and you go out to, and even then, there's no guarantee.
Right. Well,
Yep.
and that brings us back to what we were talking about before about the pen name, because right, if you're starting to get a following under one name,
Mm-hmm.
why do that? Why start all over again
Right.
with
And-
that
another
other
name.
name?
Exactly. And that's what we were talking about. Why do the traditional publishers want that? You would think they would want you to keep your name.
Right.
Because I do think Jan's right. She's glad that she's branching out and reading other genres.
Yeah.
And I think that would actually encourage you to do so.
Right. Right.
Like, well, let me see what they're writing about now.
Right.
I think the whole industry is changing. And I think the climate's changing. And the way that we look at and approach writing is changing.
Yes, I agree.
And I think it's for the better, to be honest with you.
I agree.
Yeah.
I also think that the industry is really whipping people into shape when it comes to traditional publishers and when it comes to how books are sold. As long as people aren't afraid to go out there and push their work, you've got the bookstores worried. Like, we've got to get on board with this. We talked about this when you were on the show last time as well, about how most of the chain stores, especially the bigger stores like Barnes & Noble, they don't accept self-published authors as readily as the independent stores.
Right.
So it's really hard to get in and get a book signing at Barnes & Noble. Yeah, there are a lot of steps you have to follow to get there. And I get that. And they're right. Your book should read well. It should look good. It should have everything on there that a traditional publisher requires, because you can do that now.
There's a standard, is what
right, and there's
basically-
no need not
But that's
to.
with anything. There's a standard if you're going to do any kind of business.
But the problem is they still don't want independent authors as readily, even though you do go through all those hoops to get it to where it should be.
Right.
And I think sometimes they make a mistake because you've got to give people a chance.
Yeah,
And you never know where that next bestseller is going to come from.
exactly.
self-published or traditional published. It doesn't matter anymore. That's where the industry is changing, and I think everyone needs to get on board with that.
And it's like you said, though, as long as you have a book, whether it's self-published, and it's following all of those requirements, then why should it be so archaic, the way of thinking, that you can't accept that?
Right. But we even talked about how I'm pretty sure it's this way with Barnes & Noble. I know it was last time I dealt with them. They're only allowed so many self-published authors a year, or basically what it is that if you come to the store, because this is the way it works, if you're a self-published author and you don't go through their corporate office in New York or whatever, you can still go to an independent Barnes & Noble or or Books A Million or somewhere like that, these independent stores, and you can ask to do a book signing.
Right.
Yeah.
They're allowed to do so many of those a year. So even if you're not referred from corporate office, they can still make that decision locally.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the problem is that look how many self-published authors there are.
True.
So they have to take in consideration which ones stand the best chance. And if they don't know you, have never heard of you, it's going to be hard to get that book in that store
You're
as
right.
a self-published author.
You're right, because I've seen friends have problems.
Now, if you go through New York, you have to go through certain criteria as a self-published author to be able to be put on their list to be required, or not required, but recommended as an author to do signings at their store. Because they're going to want to know what you've done, what your platform is, what your marketing angle is. So all those criteria have to be met. So because you could be put on a list with Barnes & Noble to where if you go to a store and you approach one of the CRMs and ask them to be in their store, they can check and see if corporate has you on their list, and then they can take you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you still have to meet a lot of criteria to get there. So it's a lot of hard work to get in as an independent author, to just get your foot in the door as an independent author, to do a signing. We just talked with one author who went to an independent store, and he's the one who's one of bestsellers, but he went the route of, because he self-published his last book, he had to go to an independent store to get started.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult, but you understand why. We just talked about how there's 7,000 new books a day.
A day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Well, and that's something for our new writers to consider. While you're writing your book, also consider how you're going to market your book, and take some time out of your day to come up with a strategy. By the time your book is done, your strategy is done, you're off and running.
Right, you really do have to become a business person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That was the hard part for me.
Yeah.
Even as a traditionally published author, I had to become a business person because I had to get out there. And that was very hard for me.
Well, for example, right now you have a platform because you have readership. You have books, you have past books, so you have an audience.
Mm-hmm.
But when you started out, how did that go? I mean, what did they expect you to do?
Well, first of all, remember, I started with the children's books, so it was an entirely different type of experience because I was the focus group. You had to. There were certain guidelines that, you have to make sure when you're doing these things like signings and appearances, it's different.
Yeah.
And I actually started with the schools.
Okay.
Going into the schools and talking to them, and then doing, like little assemblies and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And then from there, I branched out to Barnes & Noble and did like a reading hour. And, and then after the reading hour, it went into a signing. And that's how I got my foot in the door.
But did you do that, or did the traditional publisher do
I
it?
did that.
You did that.
I did that. My first traditional publisher was smaller than
but
what.
Still, you had a publisher.
I mean, they did do some marketing.
Yeah.
But as far as being in town and getting my name out there, I did that. And that's what I'm talking about when I said I was very much the introvert, and I had to learn and force myself to do it. Force myself to find my voice.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that there has to be something internally that you say, I'm going to have to do this, and just do it. When I started this show, I didn't know I wanted to do a radio show. And I remember the very first show, because they actually asked me if I would be willing to do this show.
Uh-huh.
And I liked the challenge. I was up for the challenge. wasn't something I ever thought about doing. And then I was a nervous wreck. We had the right guest on that day who helped me through it. And then as we went along, I questioned myself, why are you doing this radio show?
Right.
Yeah.
What is the point?
Yeah.
And then as time went by and we met more authors,
Yes.
you know, like Sandra Leeson Cahalan was the first one. And then we had, you know, like Gwendolyn McNutt, you know, she came through the radio show,
Right.
through Dana Michelle. And, you know, then I started realizing this is the reason I'm doing this show. Because these people have, they know they have something they want to do, and they know they want to get it out there, but they don't know how to do it.
Right.
And the more I realized this is why I'm doing the show, the more comfortable I became with doing this show.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's like second nature. I mean, I don't feel uncomfortable doing it. I might feel uncomfortable if I'm intimidated by someone who I know has a radio show and I'm interviewing them, you know. But other than that, you know.
But that's with anything. I mean, I know that I get a little, you know, like nervous if I'm going to go and do a panel, let's say, with an author, group of authors, and, you know, they're my peers, and they may have a name, you know, out there more than
Yeah.
mine, and I get a little nervous.
Well, see,
No.
I can't get nervous because everyone that's on our show has a better following than I have ever had. So, you know, so you have to put that in perspective.
But, you know, once you start doing it, then you get relaxed.
Right. And that's the whole thing about if you're going to do a book, if you want to do a book, and everyone wants to write a book, you got to be prepared for what it's going to take to get it out there.
Right.
If you don't care about selling 15, 20, 30,000 copies, don't worry about it.
Right.
If your goal is to possibly just, if you're happy, if you sold 500 copies and you push towards that and you reach that goal and you're happy at that, then fantastic. You accomplished what you set out to do.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's something everyone has to put in perspective too, is what is the goal? What is the real reason for doing it? And if it's just to write the book and get it out there and you got it in a few people's hands, then you accomplished what you set out to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And you should be proud of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's a misnomer about bestsellers. Everyone thinks that a bestseller sold 1 million copies, and
No.
that's not true.
No.
You could have sold 1,800 copies that week and be on the bestsellers list, the New York Times bestsellers list.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on the week, whose books are out there, and what's going on in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? We're running out of time.
Oh,
Wow,
my.
that went
I know,
fast.
that went very fast.
Good.
So we'd like to thank our guest, Vicki-Ann Bush, and we can learn more about Vicki-Ann Bush on...
Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and VickiAnnBush.com.
All right. So I'd like to thank you, Vicki-Ann, for being on the show, and my co-host, Janet Corsi. And you can find out more about our show on youtube.com. Just go to youtube.com/aspects of writing, or you can go to our website, which is what I recommend. Just go to aspectsofwriting.com. And there you'll find links to all of our syndicated shows and iHeartRadio, iTunes, Roku TV, AMFM247.com is the company that promotes our show. So just go to AMFM247.com and you'll see just scroll down on the shows and you'll see Aspects of Writing there. In addition, we archive all of our shows on aspectsofwriting.com. We archive both the audio version and the video version. And the video version's not much. It's just sitting here talking. So if you just want to see 3 people talking into a mic, just go to YouTube.
That's us.
Live it up.
Live it up. That's right. But, both those shows are always archived after the show is aired. And then the audio version is always kept on our show on the archive tab. So if you go to the archive tab, all past shows are there. YouTube has a larger archive show because we actually have shows that go all the way back to 2012.
Yep.
So if you go on YouTube, you will see shows that were videotaped all the way back to 2012.
Yeah.
Kind of funny to look at. But anyway, this is your host, James Kelly. Remind you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Vicki-Ann, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was.